All right, joining me now, my great pal, Art Laffer, former Reagan economic advisor, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. Arthur, it's good to see you. I have lots of things to talk to you about.
Good to see you, Larry.
And you're our lead guy today, so that's something. But on this $350 billion, this is just the Just Like China bill. China uses state-run funds. They allocate funds. We're doing the same thing. I got 18 Republican senators who signed onto it, which is pathetic. By the way, no Republicans in the House voted for this monstrosity, except this guy Kinzinger, from Illinois, but he's not a Republican. So these senators, and this guy Todd Young insults our pal David Asman, who is a good market-oriented supply-sider, bless his heart. Arthur, can't we do better than this, really?
You're on fire, Larry. I love it, love it, love it. Let me just say, this bill that you're talking about is $1,000 or more per man, woman, and child in the United States. Then the second point I would make, that's just a huge amount of money. The second point I'd make is it costs about 31 cents to take that money from the private sector and put it in the government, for them to then make the investment, which is a double whammy against it. It makes no sense whatsoever. Just get out of the business. Stop passing bills and just get back to free markets the way they should be. None of these proposals by the Democrats increase the prosperity of America. They just plain don't. And they sure as heck don't increase our competitiveness with China. Private sector is the only way we're going to compete with China, period.
I mean, this is, by the way, I don't really know this guy, Senator Young. I think he's been on the show, but I'm not really sure. It's not personal. It never is with me. But it is policy and political. I mean, it's a terrible thing. It's so funny. Republicans are all clapping themselves on the back because they stopped the $5 trillion BBB, big government socialist bill, whatever. And then they go and sign up for this nonsense. And they do it in the name of competition. Yeah, Arthur, in our next life, you and I need to control these Energy Department slush funds and Commerce Department slush funds. Man, we missed out. We've been hundreds of billions of dollars have thrown around. And, of course, no financing behind it. And this is part of the darn problem. Washington has lost its way. It has lost its mind. Now, I want to, you're one of your favorites, Janet Yellen. Again, none of this is ever personal. There's a good story today. The Wall Street Journal, our friend Phil Graham wrote a story. Janet Yellen says Laffer curve supply-side economics didn't work. Tax cuts, regulatory cuts, none of that ever worked. And we have modern supply side, and I just made a little list from Ms. Yellen's. Modern supply side, which will foster growth and productivity in jobs. Child tax credits, paid family leave, expanding Obamacare, more health subsidies. In general, federal investment, not private investment. She calls that modern supply side. She says that's the key to growth. And the stuff that you've been arguing for and the rest of us followed in your footsteps down through the years is just all wrong. Private sector stuff, all wrong.
I don't know where she gets her stuff from. I mean, honestly, if you look at the tax revenues that came from the Trump tax bill, yours and the president's, revenues increased substantially in the 2 years after that bill than they had in the 2 years before. I mean, it paid for itself well. It created the lowest poverty rates in America, especially amongst the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, inner city, less educated. I mean, what more do you want than that? I mean, I had a debate with Democrats of whatchamacallit, I can't remember his name right now. But,
Austin, probably Austin
2 years before this, when the bill was being passed, and went through all of this stuff. And frankly, it's worked perfectly. It worked just as well as you and I thought it would. And I don't know how they still complain it doesn't work.
Is there a real-world example? I mean, you're right. The data, the numbers really speak for themselves. But.
They're perfect.
Let's, Bernie Sanders, right? Joe Biden won, but Bernie Sanders really won, okay? It's Bernie Sanders' party, AOC, Socialist Party. Okay, fine. I mean, it's a free country. They can be socialist. But that doesn't mean they're right. They always cite, Mr. Sanders in particular, Sweden and Denmark, the northern European countries, which at one time were, very socialist-oriented public sector. But, Arthur, the neat part about that story is if you look at what's happened in the last 10, 15, 20 years, they've cut taxes and they've cut regulations and they're becoming more capitalist than we are.
Oh, very much so. There's no death tax. There's no gift tax. I mean, it's all very pro-growth. They control their own currency, and their currency is sound as opposed to ours in the euro. I mean, they've done a great job. Sweden probably is the most capitalist nation of all, with the most pro-growth agenda of all. It's just amazing what they've been doing. And I don't know where Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and these others come out, but they're looking at a Sweden of Olof Palme rather than the Sweden of today, which is very pro-growth supply-side economic policies. It's just great.
I mean, if you want to be like Europe, I don't want to be like Europe because Western Europe is not doing well, France and Germany and Italy, but those North countries are. And by the way, you've been to Central Europe, Hungary, Poland, Baltics, you've taught them supply-side economics. Aren't they doing very well using, private investment, free enterprise, rate of returns?
They sure have been. I mean, they've been doing very well doing that, and that's exactly the way we should do it. I mean, whether it be Reagan or Trump or Kennedy or even Bill Clinton, I mean, all of those policies of those four presidents worked beautifully. They were not Janet Yellen, quote-unquote, supply-side economics. It's just silly what she's saying, and I don't know why she says it, because, frankly, you would think you'd, even above your government position, supporting your president and all that, you think you'd be really focused on trying to help America. And even if it meant going a little bit against your president, you should be pro-American more than pro-Biden. And that's not what I hear from her.
Yeah, I mean, look, all the spending is just created 7% inflation, probably on the way to 10% inflation. That's all it's done. That's all it's done. And this, Senator Todd
it's sure
Young,
done that.
He wants to put in another $350 billion, and they'll probably come with another COVID relief bill. They already passed a useless infrastructure bill for $1 trillion, which the EPA and the regulators have completely undercut. I mean, all this is inflation. And, in a year or two, it's really going to damage the economy. Speaking of a year or two, Arthur, last point. The Washington Post, of all places, wrote a pretty interesting story, news story, that the spike in the money supply is the principal cause of inflation. And, they mean the Fed's reserve balance sheet and M2, and that they singled out. I don't recall if they singled you out or whoever, but they singled out, monetarist types, Steve Hanke, I don't know. Anyway, Art, that's kind of a revelation, and I just wanted to spend the last minute or so. The Fed's not going to end inflation unless they cut back on the money supply. I mean, that's kind of where this is going.
I would even go further than that. As long as they are buying government deficit bonds, and as long as interest rates are in the range they are, you've got negative real interest rates, Larry, that are clearly not going to control the rate of growth of the money supply or inflation, period. I mean, that's just not going to happen. The way Paul Volcker did it was he got interest rates up over the rate of inflation. I mean, when we took office, Larry, the prime interest rate was 21.5%, and inflation was running in the mid-teens. In that, it was a huge real interest rate that really brought the pressure back on the feds and brought them into control. That's what they did. But can I make one suggestion for you with Senator Young, if I can?
Yeah.
Offer to him, give him a call privately, let him talk with you privately, and then see if you would can bring him on the show. I think it scares him to think of a combat situation, and I feel sorry for him because, he's on TV and he's got to defend himself. No, just sit and talk to him privately, calmly, peacefully. I think he'll see your point of view completely, Larry, and I think he'll switch his vote.
Well, that's a lovely thought. Look, I would have been nicer. Actually, none of this is personal. This is only analytic. That's all this is.
I know that.
But he came after my friend David Asman, who is a free market supply-sider, who used to run the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal when you contributed and I contributed in the great golden days of the late Robert Bartley. I mean, I've extended on the show, Mr. Young. How could Todd Young, an ex-Navy, I think he was a Marine, be afraid of an old guy like me, for heaven's sakes? I can barely straddle up to the desk here, to the set to make the show. He can't be afraid of me.
He's afraid of being on TV, Larry. And he's afraid of losing an argument on TV.
He was on TV a couple hours ago.
I know, and he slipped. He shouldn't have said what he said. He just shouldn't have. And especially not the David Asman. That's just not right to say that. But I would take him to the private side and just talk to him personally, and then invite him on the show in a very lovely, cordial way. And I think you'll see him switching his position.
Well, I'm Mr. Civility, always. It's never personal.
I know you are. You always have been.
I I could probably forgive him. I'll have to pray on it, but I think I can forgive him for his economic policy mistakes. I'll work on that, I promise.
I adore you, Eric.
Art Laffer, you're the best.
You are amazing.
Save
I love
America,
it, love it, love
kill
it.
the bill, deep prayer and meditation.
Kill the pill. Kill all these bills,
That's
Larry.
correct. Every darn one
all
of them.
these bills.
Every darn one
It's
of them.
just, there's no end to these things.